The Achaemenid Empire was born in an apparently marginal corner of the ancient world, the region of Anshan, in present-day southwestern Iran, where a dynasty of Persian tribal chiefs bore the name of their ancestor Achaemenes, who lived around the 8th century BC. For generations, these kings reigned as vassals of the Medes, the Iranian people who dominated the Persian plateau and much of the Near East. Everything changed with Cyrus II, whom history would remember as Cyrus the Great. In 550 BC, he overthrew the Median king Astyages, absorbed his kingdom, and within a few years built the framework of what would become the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that point. His rise was lightning fast. In 547 BC, he defeated Croesus of Lydia, the proverbially wealthy king who ruled over western Anatolia. And in 539 BC, he entered Babylon almost without fighting, welcomed by a population weary of their own king Nabonidus. Cyrus did not destroy the city, did not deport its inhabitants, did not humiliate its deities. He did the exact opposite. He presented himself as a liberator, returned the statues of the Babylonian gods to their temples, and allowed the peoples deported by the Assyrians and Babylonians to return to their homelands. Among these were the Jews deported by Nebuchadnezzar, who in the biblical scriptures celebrated Cyrus as the anointed of the Lord, an extraordinary title for a foreign and non-Jewish king. The Cyrus cylinder, discovered in Babylon in 1879, and today housed in the British Museum, is a clay tablet inscribed in cuneiform characters with this philosophy of governance: respect for local cults, the liberation of prisoners, the rebuilding of temples. Some historians consider it the first declaration of human rights in history, although this interpretation is debated among scholars. Cyrus died in 530 BC during a military campaign in the steppes of Central Asia. His son Cambyses II completed the conquest of Egypt in 525 BC, defeating Pharaoh Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium. After his death in mysterious circumstances, a brief civil war brought Darius I to power, who reigned from 522 to 486 BC and radically transformed the structure of the empire. Darius divided the territory into 20 satrapies, provinces administered by governors called satraps, almost always relatives of the king or members of the Persian elite. He created an extraordinarily efficient postal system. The Royal Road, more than 2,000 kilometers long, connected Susa to Sardis in Anatolia, with post stations every 30 kilometers that allowed royal messengers to cover the entire distance in 7 days, while an ordinary traveler would take 3 months. He introduced a unified currency, the gold daric, standardized weights and measures, and built at Persepolis the ceremonial city that would become the eternal symbol of the empire. Persepolis was not a capital in the modern sense. It was the place where every year, during the festival of Nowruz, the Persian New Year, delegations from all the peoples of the empire brought their tributes to the King of Kings. Its monumental reliefs, carved into the rock and decorated with processions of peoples in different garments, represent one of the most extraordinary visual testimonies of the diversity of the ancient world. Under Darius III, the empire reached its greatest geographical extent, from the borders of northwestern India to Thrace in Europe, from Egypt to the steppes of Central Asia. Around 50 million people, 1/3 of the world's population at the time, lived under Achaemenid rule. The military campaigns against Greece, however, marked the first great setback. The Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, where the Greeks defeated the Persian army of Datis and Artaphernes, was a blow to the empire's image of invincibility. Darius's son Xerxes I, attempted a far larger punitive expedition in 480 BC. He crossed the Hellespont on a bridge of boats, marched through Greece, burned Athens, and seemed on the verge of subjugating the entire peninsula. But the naval defeat at Salamis, where the Greek fleet led by the brilliant Athenian strategist Themistocles destroyed the Persian fleet in a strait where numbers did not matter, changed the course of the war. The following year, at Plataea, the Persian army was definitively repelled. These defeats did not weaken the empire territorially, but they fed into the Greek and later Western tradition the image of the East as a despotic entity destined to be overcome by Greek freedom, a narrative that shaped historiography for centuries. The empire continued to prosper for another century and a half. Artaxerxes I, Darius II, Artaxerxes II, and their successors ruled over an immense territory, skillfully managing internal tensions, satrapal revolts, and conflicts with Greece, often financing the Greek cities that were enemies of Athens, or vice versa, using Persian gold as a tool of foreign policy. Achaemenid culture was extraordinarily cosmopolitan. Old Persian was the language of the court and royal inscriptions, but Aramaic was the administrative lingua franca. Elamite was used for palace accounts, and Babylonian for commercial transactions. Greek, Egyptian, Babylonian, and Lydian artists worked side by side on the construction sites of Persepolis, creating a hybrid and original artistic style that had no precedent. The end came with staggering speed. Alexander the Great of Macedonia crossed the Hellespont in 334 BC with around 40,000 men. In less than 10 years, he conquered the entire Achaemenid Empire. The key moments were the Battle of the Granicus in 334, that of Issus in 333, where Darius III fled, leaving his family on the battlefield, the capture of Tyre in Egypt, the decisive Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, where the Persian army was annihilated, and finally the burning of Persepolis, which ancient sources describe as an act of revenge for the destruction of Athens. Darius III was killed by his own satrap Bessus in 330 BC, and Alexander proclaimed himself the legitimate successor of the Achaemenid kings, adopting their robes, court rituals, and part of their administration. The Achaemenid Empire ceased to exist, but its administrative structure survived in the Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged after Alexander's death. Modern knowledge of the Achaemenid Empire owes an enormous debt to excavations and studies carried out over the past 2 centuries. Persepolis was identified by European travelers as early as the 17th century, but the first systematic excavations were conducted by the Oriental Institute of Chicago in the 1930s, under the direction of Ernst Herzfeld and later Erich Schmidt. Among the most important finds are the Persepolis fortification tablets, approximately 30,000 documents in the Elamite language recording payments of food rations to workers, craftsmen, and officials engaged in the construction of the royal palaces. These texts, studied and published by the Oriental Institute over the course of decades, reveal an administrative system of extraordinary precision, with annotations on quantities of barley, wine, dried fruit, and silver distributed to workers from every corner of the empire. The tablets also show that women received rations equivalent to those of men for the same work, a finding that surprised many scholars. In recent years, research on the Achaemenid Empire has received important impetus from new technologies. Isotopic analyses conducted on skeletal remains found in cemeteries in Iran and Central Asia have made it possible to trace population movements and understand geographic mobility within the empire. Photogrammetry and laser scanning have allowed the detailed documentation of the rock inscriptions at Behistun, the great trilingual text in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian that Darius I had carved into a cliff more than 100 meters high in Iran, and which was the key to deciphering cuneiform writing in the 19th century, an operation carried out by the Briton Henry Rawlinson between 1835 and 1851 by lowering himself down the rock face with ropes. Recent excavations at Pasargadae, the first capital founded by Cyrus the Great, have uncovered structures from the royal gardens, the so-called paradises, a Persian term from which the word paradise derives, which were irrigated in tree-lined spaces conceived as a representation of cosmic order on earth. The tomb of Cyrus at Pasargadae, a simple stone chamber on a stepped base, remains the most visited monument of ancient Iran and was the subject of in-depth study by Italian and Iranian missions in the 2000s. In 2007, the Getty Conservation Institute launched a multi-year project for the restoration and conservation of the reliefs of Persepolis, which had been severely damaged by air pollution and acid rain. Chemical analyses carried out on residual pigments demonstrated that the reliefs were originally painted in vivid colors: red, blue, yellow, and green, an image far removed from the gray stone we see today. In 2017, UNESCO renewed international attention on Persepolis, already a World Heritage Site since 1979, with new three-dimensional mapping campaigns of the entire site. Genetic studies published in international scientific journals between 2019 and 2023 analyzed ancient DNA extracted from skeletons found on the Iranian plateau, confirming the biological continuity of Persian populations across the ages, and shedding new light on the migrations of Indo-European peoples who gave rise to the Medes and Persians around 4,000 years ago. The legacy of the Achaemenid Empire is vast and often invisible in its pervasiveness. The satrapy system influenced the administrative organization of the Hellenistic kingdoms, the Roman Empire, and the Byzantine Empire. The Zoroastrian calendar, the official religion of the Achaemenid kings, though never imposed on their subjects, survives to this day in the Parsi community in India, descendants of Persians who fled after the Islamic conquest of the 7th century AD. The word paradise, as already mentioned, comes from the Persian paradisa. The word satrap has entered European languages. Nowruz, the Persian New Year celebrated at the spring equinox, is still celebrated today by more than 300 million people in Iran, Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, Kurdistan, and in diaspora communities around the world, and is recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. The tradition of tolerant governance toward religious minorities, inaugurated by Cyrus and continued by his successors, left a deep mark on political thought and international law. The Achaemenid Empire was the first great experiment in multicultural governance in history, a model that we continue to study, debate, and in some measure, seek to emulate even today.